Alright, as we continue to go slowly through this year, much slower than we typically do, let's catch up on three more movies, all of which are pretty crazy in their own way. I guess that's what they have in common. We're going to start with Cocaine Bear, and of course, I wasn't really sure how to go into this because it was being built up as this movie that knew what it was and it was going to be super campy, but I've also talked a lot before about how I'm not the biggest fan of these sort of meme movies, I guess you could call them. Um, where it's like they build up their reputation long before they come out, and they're basically a punchline, but the appeal is supposed to be that they're obviously in on the punchline, but a lot of the times it also feels like it's trying really hard to be sort of have this sort of relevance and be a fad in a sense. And obviously it worked as far as, Cocaine Bear was somebody in a bear suit was at the Oscars with Elizabeth Banks, and it was a whole running joke and all that, and it went for a while. It might have dropped off by now, which is another reason why I kind of like doing these sort of after the fact, talking about them. But yeah, and obviously it built up its reputation also on this supposed true story of this bear that, snorted this cocaine that fell out of a plane and went on a rampage, though apparently the rampage thing did not happen and it died pretty quickly after after ingesting all of it. But the movie does kind of play with that also, where it gives us information about bears and how to handle attacks and stuff like that. And then the punchline is that it cites Wikipedia. So so right away you can get a sense that even if it is trying maybe a little too hard to be what it is, there's enough of an awareness here that it still feels a little. It doesn't feel like it's behind necessarily. So it's clever enough that it doesn't completely fall into the trap of what it could have been if it just wanted to be this, meme for a little bit. And I also have to shout out Matthew Rhys. Major props to Matthew Rhys for setting the tone. Setting the tone right away with no dialogue whatsoever in one scene. So right away it's like, okay, I'm not completely against this movie. I kind of maybe came in hostile, but let's see how well it handles what it does. And it's got a really great cast. Obviously, Kerry Russell's kind of at the center of it. Obviously, it's one of Ray Liotta's last roles. As a typical villain he would have played many times over his career, just now within this very ridiculous scenario. We have Alden Ehrenreich and O'Shea Jackson Jr. working a lot together. There's Brooklyn Prince from the Florida Project and her little friend. I'm not sure who that is, but that's the scenes with the kids are surprisingly fun and funny. I was usually in movies like this, it's like the kids will be the worst and most annoying part, but here in cases where they're annoying here, it's clearly the intention, and they're able to find the humor in that. Margot Martindale is a very sort of aggressive park ranger of sorts. Um, there's a lot going. Jesse Tyler Ferguson, who I barely recognized at first glance. I think it's because they kind of made him look a little heavier on top of the hair and the mustache and all that. But yeah, it's a pretty stacked cast, and a very eclectic cast. And so all of them are gonna, bring what they can. But obviously, at the end of the day, the concept is the Cocaine Bear aspect. And yeah, there's some stuff in here where it's like one of the kids actually calls it the Cocaine Bear throughout the movie. There's moments where people have to stop the whole movie to say, "Guys, you don't understand. A bear did cocaine," and it's like, yeah, I know we need your trailer shots, and we need to really build up the meme they're trying to put out there of what this movie is. Yeah. But there's still, I think, surprisingly something to admire in how they handled this and the beats that they hit. I don't think that... I think, actually, the problem with the movie is it does feel like it could have gone harder, and I think a lot of the reason it feels like it might not is it probably needed more convincing CGI, because it does. There are a lot of cases where it looks cheap, thus making the whole movie look kind of cheap. And maybe that's also the point, because it does feel like such a B movie setup. But at the end of the day, a cheap movie feels cheap, and that's, I don't know. I feel like there's a difference between a movie that like actually feels cheap and a movie that's clearly supposed to be almost grindhousey, and that it doesn't really fit that vibe. Where I guess it's almost like the shoddy CGI makes it look like the newer kind of cheap rather than an old-fashioned cheap, which is what we would kind of look for with stuff like that, with stuff that's more campy. But there is a enough of a balance, I think, with despite all the CGI, there is practical gore throughout, but I still think I don't know, there's something off here to where it feels like the way the concept promises that this is going to be an unforgettable experience. And like I was describing before, it does just kind of feel like a fad. It does feel like it's not going to, like, it now that it's kind of had its thing, it's going to move on and people are just going to remember it as, oh yeah, remember that. And I guess it worked with a lot of people. A lot of people thought it was like, whoa, totally insane and totally crazy. So they might remember it as, oh yeah, that crazy movie, but then they'll probably go on to some other thought. And it'll just be something that exists, and something that you saw once a while back that was really trendy at the time. And because there's not really a lot of memorable scenes. I think the ambulance scene will stand out, and the scene with Jesse Tyler Ferguson and the kid in the opposite trees might stand out. Other than that, everything feels like it's just kind of moving along. There's a lot of stuff here that's kind of weirdly the editing is like way off here. There's a lot of what I guess you could call Family Guy cutaways. There's a lot of those for some reason. One of which is particularly bizarre, where the guy's talking about how he was going to like move away with his friends and they were going to go live together or something, but he's now imagining them in like their gory state after they've been killed when he says this. I don't know what the hell that was. But you can see, and I'm guessing this is Elizabeth Banks as the director, where she was trying to put in stuff like that to where it was like where the movie almost has a surreal kind of quality, which I can totally get going after given this concept. But once again, much like the nature of the movie itself, I don't think it goes hard enough in that direction, and if it did, it might have been better. Where if she did kind of latch on more to the surreal kind of thing and go towards that, and give the movie this whole sort of trippy feel, you probably could have had something more. But as it is, it feels surprisingly generic in like the middle, where it almost feels like any random slasher movie from the 80s. It just happens to be a bear. And then you throw in the cocaine aspect, which I mean, obviously is going to wear thin after the 20th time you watch the bear ingest cocaine. It's just going to be... And I know you're probably supposed to think, oh, it's getting crazier and crazier the more we see that, but no, it just kind of starts to feel like the movie's running in circles in the middle, because it's like, people get killed, the bear will stumble across more cocaine, it'll do cocaine, and we're supposed to think that's the craziest thing we've ever seen, and then it'll just kind of repeat for a while until Ray Liotta comes back in so that we can have some kind of climax. So, and it's that old thing where you have like a nature kind of threat in this bear, but ultimately it's going to be the human that ultimately becomes the main villain, and we're almost going to be rooting for the bear by that point. That old thing that we've seen, not this specific thing obviously, but you get what I mean. We've seen the thing where it's like it always comes back to man is the worst monster and stuff like that, which is not wrong. We've just seen it a lot, so especially in movies like this. So yeah, so like there is some crazy stuff here. They also could have leaned more into, like, or it gives glimpses of the crazy they were probably really aiming for the whole movie, but it's only just in those glimpses. Like, when accidental deaths happen that have nothing to do with the bear. There's a couple of those, and they're probably the most memorable death scenes in the movie. Interestingly enough, the attacks are just kind of just that, like their attacks and all that. What you would expect. None of which obviously are as well done as, say, The Revenant. Not that I would ever try to compare these two. Clearly, this is not what that's trying to be, but still, it, like I said, it just keeps feeling like it could have gone harder and been more memorable, and it just feels like it's not there. It just really feels like it came and went. So that's, I would say, kind of a letdown, but that's kind of what I expected after all the hype. It's like I said, when they're really, really trying to push a movie on its concept alone, you can more or less expect that most of the time. That it's gonna give you that concept for a little bit, but then not really know what to do around it. So they'll either run in circles or they'll do something else entirely that has nothing to do with the bear, something like that. But yeah, but they stuck to it more than I thought, and it wasn't as lazy as I thought it would be. But it's, yeah, it just kind of is what it is, only less than you might be expecting. Like I said, apparently it made an impact with a lot of people, but I don't know. I'm just kind of whatever towards it. So let's go on to Knock at the Cabin, which is M. Night Shyamalan's new movie, which means it could be anything. It could be amazing. It could be surprisingly good. It could be okay. It could be like, oh, I admire what he's doing, but I don't think he pulled it off. Or it could just be an absolute dumpster fire. There's so many Shyamalans. It's great. He's so exciting in all the right ways and the wrong ways. So anytime he has something else come out, it's like, I love the Shyamalan roulette of what it could be. Which, given, with that in mind, Knock at the Cabin also is probably kind of underwhelming when you think about it. Like, it's more of the... It probably, of the four Shyamalans I mentioned, it probably falls into the camp of, I understand what he was doing, and you can definitely see where this could have been great, but it's just kind of middle ground, more or less, by the end of it. But this one does have... I like this more than Cocaine Bear. It does have a lot more of the moments of... You can see what he was going for, and he pulled it off. Even if it's not, completely consistent, and doesn't maybe quite stick its landing. There are quite a few moments in here that are worthwhile, and you can really see the talent that Shyamalan still has as far as creating an atmosphere and knowing how to shoot a scene really well. Even in his movies that aren't acclaimed or are seen as bad, you can really still get the sense that Shyamalan has such a visual way of storytelling that always stands out, regardless if the movie's good or bad or not. So when we start, obviously the first person we meet is a child, and there's two different kinds of movie children. There's children, and there's Shyamalan children, who are two totally different people. Children in a Shyamalan movie are basically aliens, and we know his movies well enough now that we just have to deal with that. We just have to expect it whenever a Shyamalan movie comes out. If there's a child in it, especially a child that's like a major character, they're not really going to behave very childlike. I would say Cole Sear being the only sort of exception to that, but that was, even so, he was still basically very weird and adult-like, but that was the character. Pretty much every child character in a Shyamalan movie since then has seemed like it was supposed to be, oh, this child's just really precocious, or this child's really smarter than their age would let on, and they just become very weird and, like I said, alien-like. So that's what we have here. It's still a great performance from this child actress. Just like I said, in a Shyamalan movie, don't expect kids to act like kids, and you buy the character a little more, probably. I guess you could say that about most of the characters in general in Shyamalan movies, but with children especially, they get weird. But so yeah, so this opening scene is this child with Dave Bautista walking out of the woods in all his big, intimidating glory, but also having that soft touch to him. And yeah, this opening scene goes on for a little bit, where it's close-ups of their faces. It's like the Silence of the Lambs close-ups, and then like as it starts to get a little more, the tension kind of starts to mount, and the atmosphere kind of starts to get thicker. These shots start to kind of tilt a little more, and then stuff like that is where it's like you can see where Shyamalan still has this ability to sort of tell the story visually, to where it's like it's already kind of odd the way it starts, but like as like I said, these shots start to tilt a little bit. You can already get a sense in the opening scene that things are really off and something sinister is kind of brewing at the moment. And and then yeah, as it goes, it turns into this unconventional home invasion movie that feels a lot like a conventional home invasion movie, but not quite, as the story develops. But yeah, these really creepy shots where we don't quite get great looks at these people. Like we've got Batista, obviously, who we've had close-ups of by this point. But when the other three that Batista's with start to walk up this pathway and the girl sees them, it's from a bit of a distance, and then we get these great moments where she's back inside with her two dads and they're looking out the windows, and we're only seeing like from the waist down, and we can see the weapons that they have. These very intimidating looking sharp objects that they're holding, and stuff like that is where it's really building up this sort of nightmarish quality to it, where it's like it feels like something you'd see in a really bad dream, or a situation you'd be in a really bad dream, yet somehow also has this very real feel to it, and it's done very well. And then of course they do get inside, and we get our sort of four horsemen imagery with the four of them, because they're talking about the fact that they're here to prevent the apocalypse, by the family making a choice, and somebody in the family has to kill one or the other in the family in order to prevent the apocalypse. And this is where it should get more interesting also, because the movie that immediately came to mind with this concept is Frailty, where it's sort of the maybe or maybe not crazy characters have to do with faith and whether you believe or whether you don't, or whether this person's just insane. And keeping that ambiguous throughout is a lot of the conflict of the story. Just like Bill Paxton in Frailty, where it's like, is he telling the truth or is he crazy? And the characters have to make decisions based on not knowing what's real and what isn't. And I do feel like they could have. I mean, it's basically the main conflict, but it still feels like there was more to delve into that it doesn't quite. Because it does do the thing where, as I was talking about it being really well shot, another way that comes into play is that the movie's in such a limited location for most of the time. In this cabin, mainly in this living room where they're tied up, and and shit is getting more out of hand and crazy as it goes on. But then, of course, in true Shyamalan style, we get a lot of flashbacks that might kind of they're good at. I'm of two minds about Shyamalan flashbacks, because they're good at establishing character and giving us background in an effective way, but I do think it does a bit of a number on the tension, because it does feel like, especially when you're in a limited location like this is, tension mounting is going to be what really drives this, and not having breaks in it is going to do that. So I don't know, I'm not sure how I would have done this, because the answer wouldn't be adding more exposition, because then you just have characters explaining their backstories for long periods of time, and that nobody wants that, especially when tension's supposed to be mounting. But the way these flashbacks do play into the story, like we've seen them in Shyamalan movies before, particularly like, Mr. Glass's background or Anya Taylor-Joy's background in Split, stuff like that, where it's like there's a reason these flashbacks are here, and they are telling the story as well, especially building the characters. But yeah, it's just it's hard to get out of it, because you want the character build up, but you also don't want to leave the tension behind. But the way it's been set up, yeah, we're sacrificing one for the other at all times, and it's yeah. But that's not to say the tension completely gets drained. It does always manage to find its way back. With the way the intensity rises, especially with Rupert Grint's character in particular, which it feels interesting because when we see Rupert Grint, we're used to like shy characters like Ron Weasley. You think specifically of Ron Weasley, but I feel like he's played a few different characters that kind of have this shy, timid quality to them. So you're not really expecting him to be the really intense, violent one that sort of seems like the loose cannon of the group. In a group where all four of them are loose cannons in their own story, but he's the one that stands out in this group of four. But there's also this interesting dynamic going on where the tension is rising and everybody feels capable of violence and they feel threatening. But they're all really, well, three of them are really polite about this home invasion and what's going on. Where it's like, obviously Batista's character is very soft-spoken and is trying to be friendly while also getting this information out and telling them what's going on. And then there's the girl that says, from outside the house, I'm sorry, but we had to cut the phone line. And she's like genuinely apologetic. They're like, everybody's like, oh, we really don't want to be doing this and we're super sorry about it, but it's gonna have to happen. And so taking that and then balancing that out with when the scenes do get really intense and violent and all that, there is this very sort of disorienting quality that really works well. And with some shots too, like there's a moment where Batista like brings his weapon up, and the whole camera, like the whole shot, like turns with him, like every time he makes these big drastic moves. Like I said, I feel like we've seen that a few times now, and I always end up calling it the James Wan shot. That's where I kind of feel like first seeing that sort of style. There's a moment where Rupert Grint is getting hit, and it's like the camera's following the fist as he's being hit. And it's like so you can see where it's like some of these visual touches. Some of them work, some of them are. You can see what he's trying to do, but they also feel very excessive. Like I said, it does add something to this sort of single location atmosphere that's being set up. So I still admire it anyway, even when it's not working. Much like Shyamalan in general. So, there's that. Talking about the violence, though, it is interesting that I'm not saying it's absolutely necessary that this need to be gory, but I do find it interesting that Shyamalan does not typically make R-rated movies. I think, if I'm not mistaken, his only R-rated movies are this one and The Happening, and that's it. And I remember that like a lot of The Happening's marketing was around the fact that Shyamalan had made his first R-rated movie, and it had some gory moments in it. And this one also has those violent moments, but it's weird that this is only like his second R-rated movie, which you think would be a big deal, and there'd be a big reason why he didn't go PG-13. But when the violent scenes happen in this, they're like always cut off. Like we only see like a little bit of blood, and we don't see any of the violent acts. And it feels like, and like normally it'd be like, okay, that's because our imaginations, we don't need to see it. It'll be creepy. It'll be, more visceral in our minds or something. But instead of that feeling, it feels more like it's distracting in the sense that you feel like you're watching an edited for TV version, and it feels like incomplete a little bit, the way it kind of skirts around actually showing the violence, which, like I said, for a movie that's already rated R is a weird choice, but okay. I was talking about the strong performances here. Obviously, Batista really stands out, and is certainly like the center performance of the movie and the real high point of the movie. But Jonathan Groff and Ben Aldridge, who I'm not completely familiar with, as the dads, make a really big impact here also. And it's like I was surprised by how effectively sad the movie is in places, where it's like they really did find an emotion within these characters, even if, like I said, they're Shyamalan characters, so they don't always feel like they're of this world necessarily, but still, there was definitely an emotion in this. But when we do finally get to our sort of final moments, it is one of those cases where I'm not, as far as sticking the landing, there's clearly a message here, and I feel like I'm not really sure what it is. Like, if it kind of feels like there's some mixed messages, but you could say like, oh, he's trying to say this thing and this thing or whatever, but it does feel like he there is supposed to be a message here that's not clear, is the vibe that I'm getting, unfortunately. So, and I could say maybe that's on me, but it also feels like, as far as what the movie's exploring, it's kind of all over the place. Where it's like, if that was more clear, I also think it'd play a big part in how well this movie feels overall. Like I said, with that kind of feeling all over the place, and some of those Shyamalan touches not quite working, it does fall in that category that I said at the beginning, where it's like I still totally admire Shyamalan and I still get super excited with him, and there's a lot of stuff here that really shows great potential, but it just kind of ends up okay. So yeah, so like it feels in the middle, but it does. There was something better in here. Which, like I said, I know you can say about a lot of Shyamalan movies, but he'll. I don't doubt that he'll find greatness again. Maybe not at the level of The Sixth Sense, but he's you know not necessarily been chasing The Sixth Sense, but audiences have been chasing him for that Sixth Sense experience since '99, and it hasn't quite been there. But obviously he's had hits since then, but this is another one where it's not like, the big hit. I especially love Split. Like, if I had to put something under this, like right under The Sixth Sense, like, Unbreakable and Split would kind of be like right there together. And so, looking for that quality, and Signs would be close to that also. Signs would be close underneath, Unbreakable and Split. And the visit was fucking crazy in a like, that was Shyamalan kind of going completely off the rails on purpose, and it kind of worked. Um, but and we'll talk about The Happening in its own video one day. We will. But yeah, when you look at it from that sense, where you could have something that's as good as like Unbreakable and Split and Signs, or you could have something as off the rails insane as The Happening. Something like Knock at the Cabin just kind of feels like sort of, you know, almost boringly in the middle here, despite the fact that it has such an intense atmosphere and many stressful sort of moments and feelings. It feels like it's still kind of here, and Shyamalan's still kind of almost there, finding that greatness again, but it's still not quite there. So let's end on Missing, which I don't think we're going to spend much time on, because even though it's been out for a while, I don't really want to say much, just in case. There's not really much you can say with a movie like this, without it being, like, you could say stuff that's happening in like the first 20 to 30 minutes and it would feel like you're saying spoilers, so, because it's just that kind of movie. But, I guess I should start off by saying, obviously, that it's got the same style and it's from the same people that did Searching. Which I loved. And Searching, I think, snuck up on everybody. Where it's like, it's crazy how well that concept worked and how much they used it. Or how well they used it. How well they use John Cho, where a lot of it's just kind of him. But it's such an award-worthy performance. And Deborah Messing was great in it, too. And, yeah, I can't say enough good things about Searching. So it's like, with this, it's kind of like Searching's already done the sort of novelty concept, so it's like doing that again. Obviously, we've had stuff like the Unfriended movies before, but I wouldn't say those count, since those are like purely horror, and these are definitely more about like mystery and like, uncovering stuff, and going through like, the sort of chain of clues and all that, and the story sort of like unraveling itself as it goes throughout. So like every 5 or 10 minutes, something new is unraveling. Maybe even like less time than that. It's just sort of constantly going. And so, like, how do you keep that up for a second movie without it feeling like just a lesser thing trying to cash in on the surprise appeal of Searching? And yeah, it does. There's moments where you can feel similar beats, and obviously they start off with this sort of Netflix show that's reenacting like certain big news events, and the event being reenacted in this opening scene is the events of Searching, which is very clever. But it also starts off with the tragic family opening, where like something happens, the tragedy happens in this family, and then our main character goes from there. But our main character this time, instead of the parent, is the child, who is Storm Reed, and it's her mom Nia Long who goes missing, and we go from there. And something right there immediately that feels like it changes the concept a little bit is one of the things about Searching was we were seeing it from John Cho's perspective. So John Cho wasn't as tech savvy as like a teenager is gonna be. So when like a lot of Searching is him trying to figure out how to use things or how things work, and it's kind of slowing down his process. Whereas Storm Reed is playing a teenager, so she's going to be able to do all this stuff very quickly. She'll know like all the ins and outs of technology. She'll be able to search faster. She knows the different apps. She knows all the workarounds. So going through this at like a very rapid pace of how to get these clues, and yet the fact that we still have a very effective non-stop nearly 2-hour movie when the technology is being used at such a rapid pace shows you right away how well this movie is going to flow, and how much it really works to keep up its momentum, because it's pretty much constant throughout, and it doesn't really lose the pace or lose that momentum or anything. And in the way they utilize certain things, like Google Translate comes in, where she has to have a conversation with somebody over the phone who can't speak English, so she has to talk to them while using Google Translate and kind of speaking phonetically the best she can. These things that sound very tedious, but the longer this scene goes on and the more they devote to this whole, she has to translate everything, then read back the translation phonetically, you can feel the tension rising, because it does. They eventually do, in this scene in particular, they set up a clock. So there is going to be a counting down to we only have so much time to do particular tasks to figure things out. And it's extremely well done. I don't, honestly, because unlike a lot of people, I also really like the Unfriended movies, so I have yet to see one of these from the perspective of from a computer and screens and all that movie that I dislike. I think if it's there's these two and there's the Unfriended. I think Host was the same way. I think that was the name of it. Yeah, and so we also get this very real feeling where not only does it feel real because of the point of view we have and what we're looking at, and this is all stuff that we recognize and that we use every day, but also stuff like there'll be times where passwords don't work, where it's like there's always the point in the movie where it's like, oh, if I just remember this thing, or oh, this person talks about this thing or whatever, and people just guess a password like on the first or second try. And this is the kind of movie where sometimes you reach the limit and the password doesn't go in and you get locked out and stuff like that happens, and she hits a lot of dead ends and stuff like that. And so it also shows the ups and downs of technology pretty well. This is something they probably could have focused a little more on, but also there's so much momentum in the story itself. You also appreciate it didn't take too many detours. But the ups of technology being how successful she is in finding a lot of things because she just knows her way around technology, and you can see the puzzle pieces and how they fit together and how she found out certain things and got certain information. And then on the other side, there's like, we see, as the news gets bigger and bigger, we see the conspiracy theories breaking out, and we see like, TikTokers and stuff like that, and people making the situation worse and getting the, because obviously with all the technology you can get information and you can get, a lot of misinformation, and it's like kind of seeing the duality of that. Like I said, it's not something they touch on a lot, but it is present. I said almost to the point that it feels like it could have played more of a part in it. But like I said, the movie is almost 2 hours and never loses momentum. So um, it does have that, and it does very effectively make this a roller coaster, where it's like you'll think one person's shady, then you'll think they're not, then you'll think they are, then you'll think they're not again, and there's a long time where you're never quite sure who she can trust, and who she can't. Um, like there's a very touching scene involving an online dating site that really throws a wrench into how we feel about certain characters. And like I said, there's going to be characters, with secrets. There's going to be characters that seem more out in the open than they might seem. There's a really well done casting choice here, where a character that's very warm and very trustworthy is played by an actor that, at least from my memory, plays villains a lot. So that was interesting also. And I've talked about how John Cho was award worthy in Searching, sincerely. Storm Reed basically has the same job he did, the same difficult job that he did, where you're basically literally the face of this movie. Where you've got like just this to work with, and you've got to have that panic and that desperation and that need to get this information, and this how there's some quiet devastation in there, because when you're in high risk situations like this, or high tension situations like this, where you know what the stakes are, you see a character that's ready to find out everything right at this very minute, and a character that's ready to just break down and cry in terror at the same time. But they're fighting through that, and she brings that role. Like I said, especially playing a younger character that's in this situation, rather than John Cho playing an adult in this situation. Not that the desperation is any more or less between them. Like I said, it just seems like it'd be more terrifying from like a teenager's perspective. So there's that, and yeah, I can see where it does. It might get old to some people because there's a lot of flip flopping going on, where it's like, oh, this is what you can trust, or no, you can't trust that, or no, you actually can, and just back and forth and so on. But I feel like I feel like this movie shows the right way to do that. And like pretty much every turn feels like it makes sense, and the way they play with like double meanings and stuff like that, where you can look for a lot of clues and you can see them if you're looking hard enough, but there'll still be stuff that can just kind of slip by you that's like right in plain sight. It does a lot of that really well, and it always has like the emotion and the heart and stuff like that. So I guess the main problem the movie might have is just the fact that it follows Searching, because Searching, like, I still, not just because it came first, but I would still say I prefer Searching as a movie. I think John Cho's performance in particular has a lot to do with that. Um, and Searching felt maybe more real than this one does, I guess you could say. Where this movie does have a certain real tension to it, but it also, as I said, does have a lot of that flip flopping and stuff like that that you would only see in like a thriller, rather than real life. But it does establish those feelings quite well. But like I said, it does still feel like it's kind of in the shadow of Searching, but that's just gonna kind of come with the territory, I guess. That and because Searching's just that fucking good, but. This is well and definitely holds its own and does do new things with the concept and doesn't feel like it's just sort of retreading. But yeah, so that's how I feel about these. So I think the next thing we're going to touch on is probably Dungeons and Dragons and a couple of other things. I'm very curious to check that out since I'm hearing so many great things about it. So we'll see where that is. I'm not really a Dungeons and Dragons person, so my expectations are still in check. I just know I've heard a lot of great things about it, so we'll see what happens with that and whatever else we talk about with it. So until the next thing, I think that's it.